Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, do you think this is an organization that would be front and center if you were senator as a candidate of the Green Party in planning our regional allocation of federal resources?
I think it has to be. But unfortunately, all organizations, I think at certain levels, even like this organization here today, we lose sight of the people on the ground. And what I want to do is to make sure that there is a comprehensive, transparent discussion between organizations like this that create the thought, that generate the ideas, and the people on the ground who have to fundamentally live out those ideas. Taking into consideration that we're planning for 2040, I always have to look back and say, well, let's look at 1970. And looking at the fact that in 1970, any planning that would have been done relative to Chicago and its region, it was something that was behind. Looking at Daniel Burnham and the fact that after World War I, between World War II, we had over 1 million to 2 million African Americans relocate from the southern part of the United States coming north, which was very well documented in the Promised Land by Nicholas Lehman, which created the urban layout that exists today. And I think that we've been behind since then because we created public housing to take away slumlords, and we've only created another circumstance in terms of the plan for transformation and the large amounts of money that went into that with private interest that when the housing mortgage market unfolded in 2008, unfortunately, a lot of people in their living circumstances were caught in the bounds of that policy. So yes, I would support organizations like MPC and CMAP, but I also would have to be very diligent in making sure that we make sure that communities that have to live out these plans have a seat at the table like we saw with the Whistler Project in Riverdale.
Okay. Now we're moving on to the Livable Communities Act, which I've explained is a potential legacy item for Senator Dodd. Let me start this way. Do you support it?
I support livable communities, but I have to think about livable communities far differently than the two gentlemen that you heard prior to this. Reading the newspaper this morning and looking at the fact that 40 people were shot in the city of Chicago over the weekend is abhorrible in terms of if we're going to talk about livable communities in 2040, how does that discussion retract what we're in today in 2010? Livable communities is not something that is political to me. It is a passion. I grew up in the Mid-South Plan for the Regional Planning Committee, and I saw how the project housing was torn down, people were systematically moved out, and the way in which it was done, I think, looking back on it, has only created more of the problem and not the solution. So as much as I want to support these acts as well as these organizations, I always have to take in mind how is this going to play out for communities, because one thing is for certain, Congressman Kirk came up here and gave very dismal economic numbers and looking at what the national deficit is going to look at in terms of what we have funded and unfunded. And the fact that if we want to be consistent about this isn't something that's going to be about politics. Politics has gotten us in this problem, and this is a very, very serious issue because it's going to have to be about productivity. Supporting livable communities has to begin now as opposed to later.
If you have a reservation about that, just briefly, do you have a better way to target federal money to be channeled other than this regional approach?
I think that one thing that I'm looking at in my platform is working with community banks, working with cooperatives, and making sure that we put enough resource in the people's hand who needs it, as opposed to having middleman. And middleman in my world is bureaucracy. Bureaucracy doesn't solve the problem. Bureaucracy exacerbates the problem. And so therefore, I'm not saying that I don't support livable communities or the act. It is just that I have to be very, very diligent in the fact that these ideas that come from councils like this, a lot of times the people who are to benefit from it are not the people at the table. And that is what my concern is, to make sure that we get it done and we get it done right. Because when we get to 2040 with the deficit being the way that it is, we won't get a second chance to do this the right way. And we have to make a massive investment in our regional infrastructure as well as our national infrastructure if we want to have economic viability going forward.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to our question about transfer.